Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag-and-drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to The Next Reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Robin and Marian are back together. Let's go to Sherwood, everybody.
For over 6 centuries, the legend of Robin Hood and Maid Marian has inspired hundreds of ballads, books, operas, plays, and movies. And now, the legend becomes a love story. Columbia Pictures presents Sean Connery and Audrey Hepburn in Robin and Marian.
Go fight the sheriffs and the kings. I love you and you make me proud.
I thought the man was dead.
He's back in Sherwood.
Robin is back in Sherwood, I said. We're here to serve you, Robin. And fight against that king.
They're flocking to him in hundreds. He's become a legend. Have you ever tried to fight a legend?
To some, he was a hero who would bring them hope. To some, he was a common thief to be hunted down. To some, he was an enemy to be respected and feared. To Marian, the woman he loved, he was her man.
You're so beautiful.
Come and sit by me.
You know, we are doing this Robin Hood series, and we had our Patreon supporters vote on the films that we're talking about. And I was looking at them because we were talking about them on the back channels over on Discord. And, I was like, we have 9 Robin Hood films we're talking about. And I'd say roughly half of them, 4 of the 9 films, are different takes on the story. And I think that that's actually kind of interesting. And there are certainly elements to kind of just the overall Robin Hood story in this one. But I think that this has done an interesting job in kind of shifting the entire thing to, what if era? It's I can picture Hollywood pitching this in the era of Hook. What if Peter Pan grew up? This is like what happened when Robin Hood came back 20 years later. It's that total kind of Hollywood pitch. But I think that it came out at an interesting time that allowed for them to do some interesting stuff with it. So, yes, long way to say I agree with you. It feels different.
Well, it's certainly an interesting and compelling entry in our Robin Hood series. And this marks, I think, the peak, right? It's all downhill from here. In our long series of Robin Hood films.
Yes, if this was a week, this would be Wednesday.
This is Wednesday.
Hump
It's Hump Movie right here. That sounds terrible. I say we talk more about Robin and Marian right after this. The Next Reel is sponsored by Audible. Visit audibletrial.com/thenextreel and sign up for a new account, and you'll have access to one audiobook of your choice on us. That's audibletrial.com/thenextreel. And, Andy, in the spirit of war and Audrey Hepburn...
Two great tastes that taste great together.
Right. I have a recommendation that I just added to my very own queue today. Audrey Hepburn and World War II by Robert Mattson in cooperation with her son, Luca Dotti. This book tells the story of her 5-year stretch in Nazi-occupied Netherlands. She served in the Dutch resistance and as a doctor's assistant in major battles and survived the Hunger Winter of 1944. Oh, and did you know her father was a Nazi agent through much of the occupation? It sounds like an incredible story of a period that really defined Hepburn as a performer and a humanitarian for the rest of her life. It even includes a PDF. If you get the book, you can download this PDF that offers all the photography contained in the print edition of the book, many from her personal collection published in this book for the very first time. Get Audrey Hepburn and World War II or any book from their extensive catalog for free. Just sign up at audibletrial.com/thenextreel to get started and support the show today.
It feels different. We've already established that about this film.
Mm-hmm.
How does it work for you?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. This Robin and Marian, you get this movie. It feels very much like it's pitching you as a romance, right? This is what happens when years later, after the Robin Hood that we think we know comes back to discover that he's still interested in Marian and he wants to woo her, and it's going to be a romance. And I was thrilled with the setup of the story. I thought it was interesting and fun and compelling, and it was a grittier kind of take on the story. It was certainly filthy, and I liked that. And then they introduce this relationship thing that is ostensibly the central premise of the film, and I was tuning out. I was just not interested in what they were telling me in the setup of the film that I should be interested in. I wanted more of old Robin and Merrymen and less, frankly, of Marian.
Even though it's called Robin and Marian, not
it
Robin
is,
and Merrymen.
Andy, intern, please, we need to remake this movie because you just fixed it. I would have seen that movie in a heartbeat. I just felt like the aging romance didn't work here. And that means that the end of the film, which we're absolutely going to talk about, is, I guess, even more shocking and not in a great way for me. How did it hit you?
Better than you, certainly. I think I found it to be a pretty compelling film. I think that it's one of those stories that could have been written better. And perhaps this does speak to why you struggled with it in general, particularly as it revolved around the romance. I think that I really actually loved the coupling of Sean Connery and Audrey Hepburn as Robin and Marian. I think that they worked well together. I loved watching them on screen when they were on sharing the screen together. I think that there was a really compelling relationship there that felt established. That's what I really loved about this film, is it felt like these two had been lovers 20 years ago, and now we're kind of coming back into that. I really loved all of that stuff. I think that the film itself has a lot of really compelling stuff going for it in the in taking us down this path again with Robin Hood, Little John, the Sheriff of Nottingham, Marian, the Merry Men, King Richard, all of these people, and kind of saying, what could have happened and giving us kind of a continuation story. I think that it works in that sense really well. But I do think that they could have used some stronger writing in it to actually make some of it sell a little better for me. Because I think that there's a lot of it that's there, but I just don't think that the script was as strong as it could have been. And this is one of those interesting films that I think that it could be redone and reworked. And this would be an interesting remake to see people tell this story again, because this series is 9 films long of Robin Hood, and we're only scratching the surface. People are bound to make another Robin Hood movie. This would be an interesting remake, and find some writers who can really draw the core of the story out and do something interesting. But I think there could be a lot there. It's just not quite there, but I found it compelling enough.
Well, I think that's probably where things fell apart for me, that the writing of the story between Marian and Robin, I just didn't connect with. And it actually surprises me a little bit that you like them so much. I wanted to like it so much because I like Sean Connery and Hepburn so much. And I felt like this is going to be another one of those stories. And, after we did The Lion in Winter and we saw such a wonderful relationship, and this was again in the hands of James Goldman, the writer, I thought that, here's a guy who tells big stories about big people like this at this time, to be able to handle. If anybody should be able to handle a story like this, it's that. Then why did so much of the scripting of the romance feel so clumsy? And I'll say some specific places, trying to pitch Sean Connery, who is always really Sean Connery, as a guy who of the period, who can't read, who or it doesn't know how to write. Like, those little quips of comedy felt totally unearned and out of character for the rest of the film. I found them super distracting, and those didn't impact you. Those feel like right in the Andy Nelson hot zone.
Oh, no, that's what I'm talking about. Like, those are the elements that were terrible, but that doesn't affect the relationship because that is consistent throughout the film. Some of that sloppy comedy writing, like, why didn't you write me? I can't write, and just lines like that were pretty rough. Those are the lines
that you expect to take you to commercial over a band break. You know what I mean? Like, they just didn't.
Yeah,
fly.
Or like when Marian crashes the wagon and he's like, she could never drive. It's like, meh.
Oh, it's just terrible.
But see, it's more than that, because earlier in the film, when we see him taking her out of the abbey where she's living, he kicks the guy in the crotch to kind of get past him. And I'm like, okay, so that's the struggle I have. Is I feel like there's a lot of really interesting, compelling character stuff going on in this film, like what happened with Marian after he left. She was so in such bereavement that she tries to slit her wrists, and she's only saved by some passersby who take her to this nunnery where she's healed and she becomes a nun. That's really interesting stuff. At the whole opening with King Richard, where you get to see kind of the realities of King Richard the Lionheart and what an awful person he is, was incredible. Like, I loved everything going on there. And those are the moments in this film that work really well. And I will say, even some of the comedy where they use the age of these characters to kind of get through the comedy, I found worked better. Like when Robin and Little John are escaping when they were trying to free the nuns from the sheriff, and the gate shuts, and you see them climbing out, And it's just like everybody's
that is
watching
a high
as these two old guys are scaling this wall. It was like, that was a kind of a comedy beat that I appreciated. I thought that was kind of interesting because it then, ends in like this violent fight where they're killing everybody. They get hurt. They have to jump into this wagon. That felt like more of the story that I really wanted to see. Those comedy beats otherwise were really rough and disruptive.
Yeah, and that sequence when they're the climbing the gate sequence, which has become now a Robin Hood trope, right? We've had it, I think, enough times that's a thing I expect. That it is such a struggle for them to get up over the top, and they get themselves over the top only to jump into the hay laden wagon, to have it completely disintegrate under their weight. I think it is just great comedy. It's fantastic comedy, and that's where this movie really hits its stride in the Robin Hood part. That they just really lay in on some of those physical beats and I think they get it right. Having Richard shot in the neck by an arrow that is thrown from the battlements of the castle in the opening. And I don't even actually now remember what his line was. What did he say? Like, "Oh God," or something like that. Or like he was very upset about it, but not scared. He was just mad.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just an amazing sort of crossover between that grit and the comedy, and just this is a movie that sets up very early that it's going to try and subvert your expectations of what this story is, and I think in many areas it does it very well.
I think that a point that you made actually about the love story when you first were talking about how you felt addresses largely another element of I think, to a certain extent, the perhaps confusion about how to tell this particular story. Obviously, we don't know what went on behind closed doors with the team that was making this film. We don't know what Richard Lester, the director, had to say to James Goldman, the writer, as they were kind of coming up with it, and how they kind of structured the script and whatnot. But what we do know is that the studio, Columbia Pictures, was really kind of nervous about this film when they were first in talks with it, because it was called The Death of Robin Hood, which right there tells you this is a dark 70s take on the Robin Hood story. They were nervous about it, though. They wanted it to be more marketable. And so, and it says perhaps also to give equal billing to Katharine Hepburn. It was changed to Robin and Marian. And all of the marketing, like every poster that I've seen in my research, it's always kind of that kind of key embrace of the two characters, Robin and Marian in a hug.
Up against a tree, yeah.
Yeah, that's like the marketing for the film. And so it's interesting that is how they decided to really push the marketing for this. And perhaps that also speaks to part of the struggle that the storytellers had in figuring out how to tell this story. Is it going to be this love story? Is it going to be this story about this death of this mythical hero? And how can we balance between the two? Clearly, it didn't work. There were issues with it.
Would that have fixed it for you? And in terms of a central question, had they stuck with the original title, would that have when I don't want to say fixed it for you, because you clearly, it worked for you. I guess I should ask, would that have fixed it for me? I think it would have been a spoiler to a pretty essential level, and I wouldn't have generally been a fan of that, but it at least would have pivoted the marketing to the point where it would have set me up for a different kind of Robin Hood story.
But I don't think that's I struggle with that, because I don't think the title came like at the last moment where they made a film called The Death of Robin Hood. Yeah. This was that film, and then they got cold feet and just changed the title.
Yeah, clearly this was a romance by intention.
Yeah, I feel like Columbia, it sounded like, I don't know. I don't know enough of the history of this film. I don't know when that change happened, but the way that I read it, and maybe I'm reading it wrong, but it sounded like the change happened earlier on when it was still kind of in the process of development. So I don't know. Now I'm curious, was it made as the death of Robin Hood and then they changed it at the last minute, or did they change it and emphasize or dictate to the writers, give a little boost to the romance in there just to make Audrey happy? I don't know. But this is the film we're left with. And I guess if this was called The Death of Robin Hood, I don't know. I don't know. I guess I would be okay with the title. I think it might work better, actually.
Any title probably would have worked better, apart from leaning in even more heavily on the romance. I think anything would have set up I really like the effort to set up the age of these characters. That's the uniqueness of it, not the fact that we're trying to rekindle this romance. Every Robin Hood story has the romance. Every one of them does. I didn't get anything new about just sort of having that story, that part of the story retold. I do like the things that you have already mentioned, the fact that they're pushing on Audrey Hepburn's sort of backstory. I don't feel like they pushed hard enough to make her a 50% participant in this story. It was still a Robin Hood story.
Yeah, right. I don't know. For me, I felt like they dealt with that in a way where I kind of really liked that aspect of their relationship as far as the love story goes. Their conversations, I think, had a lot of points made about that as far as, because I don't know, to me, it spoke to life as a woman in this particular period of time. He goes off to war and she's left. And this is a woman who completely loves him, but she's left with nothing and is bereft and has nothing to do. And she's kind of empty. And so she tries to kill herself. That was a really interesting angle. And the fact that she joins the nunnery and the fact that she kind of changes her entire life. I don't know. I found that to be really interesting. And when he came back and they kind of reconnect, I found some of their conversations to be interesting as far as kind of that trying to find what that relationship was and finding that love again. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And even right up to the end when she has her speech about how much she loves him, I don't know. I kind of liked some of those elements to it. So it's funny because I like how some of that is handled. I don't know. I think I like it a lot more than you do. I think my struggle is the sloppy comedy.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about, though, this wrap up the romance part. And that takes us all the way up to the end. You already mentioned the last speech. And I think so much of this hinges on her relationship with the church, with God, and all of that coming into conflict with her present, which is this rekindled relationship. And it all comes to her final speech. I love you more than all you know. I love you more than children, more than the fields I've planted with my hands. I love you more than morning prayers or peace or food to eat. I love you more than sunlight, more than flesh or joy or in one more day. I love you more than God. Her last line of that speech. And at this point, we know that she has poisoned herself under the auspices of giving Robin medicine. She has poisoned him as well and has killed them both. They spin it. I think they spin it as this a grand act of romance and I think grief on her part that she's had so much conflict and trauma in her life and that she's this is her final act of ending it on, as I think they tried to say, a good day. Robin says, I never would have had a better day than this, right? No, this was it. So how does that end up working for you, the way this movie ends?
The film is doing interesting things with the main characters throughout, like the relationship between Robin and the sheriff is another one that we'll definitely have to talk about because of the way that journey is. This is really a film about endings and closure.
Right.
And I think that it's a really odd decision for her to poison both of them so that they die. But in context, it actually is, I don't know, it's a very 70s kind of way to end this story where she kind of acknowledges this love that they have for each other, but knowing that Robin needs so much more than just this love. I mean, they had the perfect love 20 years ago, but he goes off to the Crusades, and which I thought was an interesting comparison when she's talking to Little John, and he's like, if you were mine, I never would have left. And I think that speaks to Robin's position and how this is an element of his life that he's not ever going to be able to step away from. And I think that the moment of her decision to kind of poison the two of them after he has had this successful final victorious battle with the Sheriff of Nottingham, to poison him and kill him, knowing that, this is the end of his story. And I think he knows that if he lived, if she healed him and he lived past this point, he would go stir crazy because he wouldn't, have a way to kind of continue to do the things that he needs to do. And this is kind of the way that he needs to go out. And so and she needed to go out because she loved him so much that she couldn't continue without him. And so, again, I think that they could have built up to it a little better throughout the film, like really build that love that she had been kind of hiding and not showing him, so that moment really carried for me. But even though it didn't carry as strongly as I wanted it to, I found it really compelling.
As usual, Andy, you have a well-reasoned approach to the climax of this film. It is a controversial climax, and I have to tell you, it is hogwash. I can't believe that you buy it so fully and completely. She chose to end a career for him that is full of an uncertain future. And I did not feel like that, like her taking those choices away from him were earned. We had... what she was doing was tantamount to what the sheriff's men were doing, just absolutely massacring the merry men in Sherwood Forest.
Not the sheriff's men. Well, I mean, they were the other guys. I mean,
the sheriff was gone. It was the other guys,
Sir Ranulph.
I don't have his name. Sir Ranulph, yeah. Him not making good on the promises of the sheriff. And I just feel so much like that. And this, I know, is on the back of me not buying their relationship as thoroughly as you did, that it just felt like it was a shock, an unearned one. And it felt, it felt like it ruined the opportunity for me to sort of celebrate what I really wanted to see in this movie, which actually was a happy ending. I wanted to see a guy, in his field. I wanted to see him wander into the forest and know that he was going to make a life there. And I think if this movie does anything well, it's demonstrate that, they can build a life in the forest together pretty quickly and make it look authentic and believable and real. And I thought that was really great. I think the ending was a robbery of what could have been a really nice way to tie the movie together. So 70s. My God. So 70s.
Well, I guess she was just taking after him. She learned from watching him. She was robbing from the rich.
Oh. Oh, dear, Andy. Oh, dear. Sweet, sweet Andy. All right, then let's talk a little bit about the sheriff, our good Robert Shaw, as our principal antagonist. How'd he do for you?
That was another really interesting relationship. I think the film did a good job of setting up Robert Shaw's character, the Sheriff of Nottingham, along with Robin Hood as two characters who were kind of going... like they needed to kind of have a better closure. Like, I think Robin felt like he wanted to come back and settle down with Marian. And then he got there and it was not quite enough for him. And I think that was an interesting element of his character. And the sheriff was just like, I mean, he was kind of going crazy. Like, he couldn't advance because he was too smart to advance. And he was stuck in this role of sheriff. And he was just basically, having these young people, he kind of in training, and he had this Sir Ranulph as his kind of, I don't know what his role is, assistant sheriff. Well, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Deputy.
Yes. Yeah.
And, he needed some closure too. And I think that's why he was so excited when Robin Hood came back. And I don't know, I just felt like Shaw played it so well, and the way he would deliver lines like when Randolph was just like, he's a dead man, and he's like, that's right, but he's my dead man. It was such an interesting take on the character, and the way that he needed to kind of have this end with Robin. And I loved the way that it ended with them, as far as him kind of waiting Robin outside of the forest for Robin to come out so they could finally have the grand duel between these two characters that really kind of was the end of their relationship. And that was, what a great duel. I love duels that have kind of a sense of authenticity. And this one was one that had this pacing of two old, tired men as they were taking swings at each other and trying to kill each other. And really kind of established the place too, because, and just kind of the sense of scale, these two men fighting, all these close-ups, but then you kind of cut back and it's a medium shots of them. And then you cut like way back and it's these two guys fighting like little dots in the distance fighting. And they're like, there's a guy with his sheep off, doing his business. It's like, it's such an inconsequential thing in the scheme of things, but to them, it was like the pivotal moment. I thought it was a really interesting way to kind of conclude their relationship.
Well, first, your comment on the way it was portrayed, just being able to use, and this is David Watkin on camera, and with Lester, Richard Lester, just making those decisions on how to use those ultra wide shots and between those medium and close shots. I think you're right. Every time it changed perspective like that, it was shocking, right? Shocking because we're taking a role of, the peasant in the distance watching, wonder what those two idiots are doing, What are those two old men doing, swatting at each other? And then to those extreme close-ups where you see some pretty grisly hits. Most of the sword shots don't feel particularly gruesome in this movie, like throughout the just general fighting. And then you get some of these shots in this fight where he's like cleaving meat from Connery's side. Like it just really feels like they've made impact. And I said that what I wanted out of this movie, or out of their relationship, was an opportunity to see him grow old. What I wanted during this fight more than anything else as an audience member was to see the death of Robin Hood in a way that is somehow I felt like the 70s version of this was going to give me a chance to see him die in a way that demonstrated his life. So many of the choices that he made lacked meaning. That was the 70s trope I felt like we were going to see, that Robin Hood dies at the hands of authority, and it was for what? For nothing. Thank you, 1970s filmmaking. And so I feel like that's the thing I kind of wanted at that moment. Once he lived, I wanted him to just live. But had he died, I would have felt rewarded in this sequence right here. One more note on Robert Shaw, though. I think the way this character was written and the way they used him and the way he used his forces to play with the merry men in the forest, I think was brilliant. It was so much fun to watch him. They would send people, Robin and his men, he would send people out to taunt them, and the sheriff would never bite. He would never bite. He was sitting in a chair watching. And then he's shaving in the bath. I mean, all of these little moments really demonstrated a fantastic take on the Sheriff of Nottingham that I think, again, was interesting. It was a really, I think, a bold twist on this character that made it really fun.
Yeah, definitely. He's an actor who carries a lot of weight and presence in quiet moments. And that was something I think I wasn't expecting with the Sheriff of Nottingham character, to have a little more of that quiet, retrospective presence.
Wisdom, right? Mm-hmm. He telegraphed wisdom, and that makes him a much more complex sort of sheriff than we've had before. Who these are characters who have been, run the gamut between just, lampoons, bumbling fools, to just straight up, deputies to royalty or then the church. And here we have a character with some agency.
And it's a return of Robert Shaw and Sean Connery as adversaries after From Russia with Love.
Yeah, that's right. From Russia with Love, which was in, when was that?
63, 13 years before
63, 13 years. You all know me.
Well, I think we should just talk a little bit about just some of the other characters that we have. And I would like to start the bidding with Richard Harris as King Richard.
What do you think of what they did here, just before we talk about Harris specifically, about what they did here to the character of King Richard after, we have watched all these other films?
Well, I think not only is it coming after we've watched these other films, but I think an important note to discuss in context of this particular film is after we've talked about The Lion in Winter, which, as you pointed out, was also written by James Goldman, who wrote this, because that is dealing with a younger Richard and his brother when they are still kind of under the shadow of their own father. And so I think he is putting an interesting perspective on these characters, taking them out of kind of the space where history has kind of painted them, or at least painted the Lionheart as kind of such this savior when he returns to England and makes everything better for the people, and actually giving him some grit and a sense of reality and kind of this idea of who a king really can be and just how ruthless and cold and uncaring they can be. That was the aspect of this that I found to be really interesting, was that they took this version of King Richard to a really dark place.
They did, and they made, I think they really leveraged one of the great gifts of this film, which is age and power. Age and power in the hands, consolidated in the hands of this particular monarch, made him a despot. And I think that was most interesting, coming off of these other films in which he is portrayed as just a straight-up hero.
Yeah, I think Richard Harris is a fantastic actor, especially when he gets to play just this sort of awful character. I love watching Richard Harris in these sorts of roles. And I thought it was interesting that he and Sean Connery had worked together in 1970 on the Molly Maguires. And Connery actually is the one who asked him to play the cameo of the King Richard in this particular film, which I think is great because Connery himself will later play a cameo of King Richard the Lionheart in a different Robin Hood film that we will talk about later.
Can we just talk briefly about seeing Ian Holm as King John?
It's a small part. Again, it felt like James Goldman was digging into kind of some of the history as far as it goes. I was really disgusted with him and his 12-year-old bride, especially because I have a 12-year-old daughter, and imagining her. And the fact that we see her, too, when she kind of pops out of the tent and it's like, are you coming back in or whatever she says? And
she says, I'm all clean now. It's just...
I was like, wow.
It's a horrible little sequence.
Yeah. That was the time, and yuck, yuck, yuck. Pretty awful. That was the time,
and a crazy little bit part for Ian Holm. It was fascinating to see him quite so young himself. And I felt the same way as we just sort of move into to Robin's lads. Seeing Denholm Elliott as Will Scarlet was a real treat.
Yeah, it was. It was kind of fun to see him pop up in this. I mean, it wasn't a big part. None of them were huge parts other than Little John. But I think it was kind of fun to see him. And of course, he and Sean Connery, this is the first of 4 films they're going to do together. The last of which we've talked about, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Been a long time. Now, you already mentioned it's a much more significant part played by Nicole Williamson as Little John. I really liked this Little John.
I did too. I think that it was just because, again, like this is the sort of pensive character looking back on his life after all this time being away. And now he's kind of in this place where he's a little more retrospective. And I think having a chance to have this conversation with Marian about, she's like, you don't like me, do you? He's like, yeah, you're John's girl. And, and he's like, but I wouldn't have left you, if you were mine. I don't know. I felt like there was a really interesting aspect to his character and his, I think his allegiance to Robin, even though he knows, I think at times that it's foolhardy to kind of make some of the decisions that they're making.
He's an interesting guy. Do you happen to collect his any of his work as a singer?
I don't. I'm looking through his filmography. I feel like the only thing that I've seen him in was probably, as Spawn, his final film role in the Todd McFarlane's Spawn,
Cagliostro.
And then in Return to Oz.
Yeah, Return to Oz. That's interesting. It's a funny, a funny list of credits that I too have not seen most of what he has done.
Oh, Excalibur. He was in Excalibur.
Interesting. What was he in Excalibur? I don't have that.
He was Merlin.
Oh, he was Merlin. Look
He
at
was
that.
Merlin. Oh, and I've seen him in more, like The Goodbye Girl. Okay, so
well, and I've heard him in The Wind in the Willows, and he was in The Exorcist 3. I know you've seen that.
Nope.
What?
I've only seen the first Exorcist.
Wow, that seems out of character. We should address that at some point. Or not, whatever.
I mean, we didn't really talk about Audrey Hepburn much, other than the fact that she was in it and kind of her role. But I think that this was a period in her life where she kind of had semi-retired. She wasn't really doing much in the way of film. This is her first film after 8 years, after Wait Until Dark in 1967, because she was kind of giving more time to her family. And I think that that's kind of always a nice thing to hear when people step away to do that. And this was kind of the start of kind of an off and on comeback, I guess I would say. She didn't come back very often. I think after this, she only made a couple more films and some TV shows and stuff before doing like little cameos like in Steven Spielberg's Always, stuff like that. But she's an actress that I have always liked. And actually, I think that she was hitting this point in her age where, I don't know, I think it speaks to all these actors, actually. They are now at a point in their lives where they're carrying a sense of the weight of the world and a kind of knowledge of life and death and that wisdom and everything. And I feel like there's a lot of that in her. And even if the script isn't always written as well as it should have been, I still feel that between her and Sean Connery.
I think this is a movie that they tried to shoehorn too much character into her part, because I think, especially after talking about it, one of the things I can imagine is maybe that this should have been 2 movies, right? Robin and then Marian. Like, I would love a movie that tells some of the story about her grief over that period. That would be an interesting study of a character that we've come to know over this time. They've imbued her with something really fascinating, and it just doesn't work all jammed in together for me in this thing. But there is maybe a goes back to the Robin Hood cinematic universe that we were talking about. I can almost see this Marian as like a CW series of 10 episodes, and it airs right after Batgirl or something, where it's her figuring out her youth, and then she takes up the arrow, and I could totally see it. Yeah,
that would actually be really interesting to see kind of more versions of this story. See people tell it.
We need more versions of that story.
And we'll cover them all.
I want to talk to you about John Barry.
Okay.
The music in general was not great.
Okay.
My first problem, which is that the music doesn't fit the scene most of the way through the movie, right? There are some elements where the fight sequence, I think the music is good, but generally the music is way too happy for some way too intense visuals on the screen. I think they just didn't match. It's like Barry was doing a score for a different movie and was only told later that there was going to be Robin Hood. Or maybe he was told it was Robin Hood and that it was going to be less fighting, and he just made something frilly and frothy. It just didn't work.
This is going back to, I can't remember, another conversation we had recently. I like the music. I think the music actually is, I love John Barry's score for this. But watching it, I think that you are right. I feel like the music may not fit. No, here's the thing. I feel like, and I don't know if this is true, I feel like the studio had John Barry write it and said, it's a romance. Write us some romantic music. It's about Robin and Marian later in life. And he wrote the music without having watched the movie and gave it to them to put in.
100%. I'm sure that's what happened.
Yeah. It's kind of funny, but I like the music. But yes, perhaps it doesn't always fit exactly what is happening.
Yeah. When they're having their little shoot off in the woods, and you hear the happy music, and then one of the sheriff's men gets shot in the eye with an arrow. It just doesn't always fit. So I struggled with John Barry's score here for that very reason.
Yeah, I can see that. One note that I just have to jump backward because we forgot to mention this. A dude throws an arrow into Richard Harris's neck.
Yeah.
A one-eyed man throws an arrow. That to me was just like so great.
That is one of those things. It happens in the first, I don't know, 4 minutes of the movie. And I felt like, okay, they're trying to tell me what kind of movie this is. I get this. This is like, it's going to be a little Tarantino. It's going to feel like, Robin Hood in Tarantino version of Robin Hood. I get it. I feel good about it. And then they just betrayed me for the rest of the movie. Just, then they introduced this love story and I felt betrayed.
Well,
Shot
it wasn't
in the neck
overly
with
violent. I think
arrow.
it wasn't quite a Tarantino moment, but it was an odd thing. And because it was a one-eyed man, I couldn't help but feel like it was something that was supposed to be out of like a Greek tragedy. Like you would see like this one-eyed person who should never have this sort of skill, but like the hands of the gods give him the ability to hit this mark. And it's almost like a weird ancient Greek curse sort of moment.
Yes, it's as much Zeus reaching through the hands of Prometheus, right?
It was,
the Clash of the Titans jam. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. We haven't talked about Richard Lester before on this show as a director.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of Richard Lester as a director? He is a director who I think carries a bit of controversy in some circles. He's, I think, known in part by some people because of the Beatles films that he directed. Hard Day's Night.
Hard Day's Night is right
Help.
up at the top of the list.
I think he also directed a lot of kind of early kind of the sex comedies like The Knack and How to Get It. He directed Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. I think that there's a lot of stuff that his career is known for. In the 70s, certainly period films was one of them, including this. He also did The Three Musketeers, The Four Musketeers. And maybe we shouldn't mention stuff like Butch and Sundance, the early days. But then there's the whole Superman aspect of his career. And he was the guy who was kind of brought in to do Superman 2. And it was this whole debacle because Richard Donner had directed most of it. But I'm blanking on their names. What are their names? The producers of those films, I can't remember what their names are, but the producers had him come in and direct the rest of it, and it created this huge rift, and Gene Hackman refused to come in and do reshoots, and
Alexander and Ilya Salkind.
The Salkinds, right. Yeah. It was like this insane situation that he was part of. And a lot of people say that, his cut of Superman 2 is an abomination. And then especially because he showed the world what he thought of Superman by making Superman 3, which it was a box office success, but is kind of a weird movie that most people don't consider a very good Superman movie, let's just say.
Well, it's been, I think it has been all but excised from canon for most Superman fans, right? I mean, it's just the thing we've just sort of moved on.
When you put Richard Pryor in a movie as a hacker, let's just leave it at that.
Yep. It's practically Black Hat. I have to say, I am a big fan of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. I think it was it is one of those movies that just defines that kind of comedy, and I think he has a real knack for that. And you can sort of feel that coming through in Robin and Marian, albeit what is that, 10, 11 years later. It's his touch to it that it just went. It just seemed to go south after that. I haven't seen anything after Superman 3. I never saw Finders Keepers or The Return of the Musketeers. Didn't see any of the documentary shorts he did in the early 90s. So for me, the last taste I got of him was his take on Superman.
Not a good one.
Yeah.
That's where I ended with him as well. And it's funny because you go and you watch those early Beatles films. And I mean, this is a guy who MTV gave him an award calling him the father of the music video because of what he did in those early Beatles films. And I think there's something to that. And I think he took that and brought a lot of that life and that kind of the sensibilities of the camera and the cutting and just kind of the whole style to a lot of those films that he was doing in the 60s. And I don't think it necessarily carried through in his period films in the 70s, but I do think that he had a creative touch. And I really enjoyed that, especially at the beginning, like the way that we began with just kind of imagery of like rotten apples and the sun and swords and sand and the one-eyed man. And it was a really interesting, compelling opening for this film. And so I felt like I was in pretty assured hands. But and then I was reminded that it's Richard Lester and kind of everything that happened to him later, like in the next 10 years after this film. And it's like, oh boy, this is a guy who, I just don't know if Superman really was something that he should have gotten involved in, because I feel like he really just made a mess of all of that.
Well, I certainly can't imagine it's something that he wants to be remembered by. I don't know, but it feels like that was, it was clearly reputation-defining work.
When a film is re-released decades later as like the Richard Donner cut, and your part of it is pretty much pushed to the side, I think that speaks a lot to kind of what people think of you and what you did to something. So pretty interesting.
So I'll go watch A Hard Day's Night, everybody.
Yes. Watch the early stuff of him.
Yeah.
But I think that this shows me that there's an interesting director here. And actually, if anything that I'm pulling out of this, I'm finding that I think that I'm curious to see more of his films. And I'm really curious to see the 3 and 4 Musketeers films that he did a little bit before this. So he's an interesting director, and I would like to see some more of him.
The 3 Musketeers, I feel like I have seen. That was Richard Chamberlain and Raquel Welch in that one, right? But I have no real memory of it. It came out, I was very, very young, like, baby. And so I would have seen it years later. And I just have this memory of the hats and an eye patch. And it just is, I feel like I liked it, but that's one that needs to be higher on the list. I think maybe our next grand experiment with these sorts of antique characters following Robin Hood, maybe it should be the 3 Musketeers.
Well, that would be interesting. It would be interesting to kind of look at and see. And I just reading about that one, it does say it adheres close to the novel and also injects a fair amount of humor. So that might speak to what they were trying to do here, kind of add some of that humor in that they thought it needed.
Anytime you add a little slapstick to these grand military stories, I think you really nail it.
Oh dear. Oh dear. So over on patreon.com/thenextreel, Pete, people can support us at various levels. The lowest, of course, is just $1 a month. Just $1 a month. You don't even know it's gone. That's how inconsequential it is on your end. But on our end, it's a great help because it really helps us keep this show going. So head on over to patreon.com/thenextreel. You can check it out at $1 a month. You're basically, giving us a tip saying, I believe in you. I support you. Thank you for having these conversations. You also get into some members only Discord channels. Or you can contribute $5 or more a month, and you're at the concessionaire level where you have access to, not only do you have access to early shows, but you also have access to the live stream as we record, where you can listen in and make fun of us while we have all of our back channel battling about what's going on with the way the show is being put together. Head on over to thenextreel.com/Patreon, where you can see all these different levels that you can join at, and you can contribute and you can help us. Thank you for your support. So I have a minor fact and tidbit.
Is it a fact or a tidbit?
It's a fidbit. Tact? It's a tactful Fitbit.
Outstanding.
Richard Lester actually wanted Charlton Heston to be in this film in a cameo role. Wouldn't that have been interesting?
Oh, dear.
But
would he have been? Would have
only
been
wanted
one
to
of
be in it if he could play the lead. Of course. So guess what? He's not in the movie. Also, what I think is interesting is that the producers of the film actually wanted Albert Finney to play Robin, and they actually wanted Sean Connery to be in it, but to play Little John. How would that casting have worked for you?
I can absolutely see that. Can't you see that? Sean Connery with the big beard, looking just like Robin Hood, but as Little John. And I think he is taller than Albert Finney because he's taller than a lot of people. That, I think, would have been a great pair.
Here's a question for you, Pete. Just say somebody decided, I'm going to make another Robin and Marian film. It's going to be more of Robin later in life. Later in life, and I'm going to cast Sean Connery as
when
Robin.
You say later in life, what? Give me just now, a geriatric Robin Hood.
Finney. Okay, so cast Albert Finney now. I think he passed away, but cast Sean Connery now. Can you see somebody doing this, like a much later in life Sean Connery?
Yes.
Is that too late?
No, I could totally see it. It's a whole different thing, but I can see it.
That'd be really interesting.
They're making Stallone is making another Rambo movie, man.
That's right. Why can't we have another?
Geriatric
Sean
Robin
Connery was very excited to be in this film because he was very much, especially after the James Bond films, very much looking forward to being in a film where he knew he would not be asked to do a sequel.
Was it interesting at all that he rarely wore underwear in this movie?
I kind of felt like I saw that as he was kind of hopping off a tree or something. And you're like, wow, is he wearing anything under there?
And I'm not judgmental. A guy can do what he wants with his undercarriage.
It's the Scottish in him.
It is. It's fine. I struggled when he would fall out of a tree, clearly commando, and then jump on a horse. I struggled heartily with that.
In other words, you wouldn't do that.
Well, a gentleman wouldn't do that. Let's just, I don't need to personalize it. I think we both know where we're going. A gentleman does not ride quite so bareback.
I think the Scottish people might have something to say to you.
Oh, Scots.
Braveheart, get in here.
Intern, get the Scots on the line.
That's right. Going back to the score, this is my last fact and tidbit for you. Michel Legrand, who we've talked about before when we were talking about, what was the film we talked about? Young Girls of Rochefort, right?
Yes.
He was a composer there, and I think he is an interesting composer. He also did the one with, why am I blanking on the name?
It could have been
Steve
really
McQueen
fun.
and Faye Dunaway.
The Getaway.
Thomas Crown Affair. I think he's a really interesting composer. He actually apparently wrote a score for this. It was rejected and only released in 2009. Now, I'm actually really curious to hear that score. And knowing your disdain for the John Barry score, I can't help but feel like you need to seek this out and listen to it and let me know if you think it actually would have been better.
I do. I feel like that should be on my list of things to do. And I'm going to rewatch Robin and Marian with this score playing.
Do it.
Really loud.
All right. I don't have any more facts and tidbits. And I will tell you right now, Pete, as far as awards go, this film is not in the award bracket at all. Not a single nomination of any kind.
Wow.
So,
well, that's 1 point in old Pete's bank book right there. I wouldn't have given it any awards either. How about the box office? Were you able to get anything, how to do at the box office?
Well, like Disney's version made just 3 years earlier, Lester's take on this tale cost $5 million to make. That's actually cheaper than Disney's, however, due to inflation, only costing $22.5 million in today's dollars, which was about $6.3 million less. The movie was released March 11th, 1976, opposite a biopic I didn't even know existed, Gable and Lombard, which is about the passionate and eventually doomed relationship between the two Hollywood stars. I want to see that now. I didn't even know that had been made. But, this film did okay for itself, earning back $8.7 million at the box office, which is about $39.2 million in today's dollars. All told, that gives it an adjusted profit per finished minute of $157,925. Not a princely sum, but enough to say it was a success.
All right, Andy. Well, I'm glad we made it over the hump movie, and I'm excited to see how this one fares when we take it to the mat. We take it to the woods. We take it to the field and start hacking away at it.
We're going to have our own little duel.
Head over to flickchart.com/thenextreel. You'll see all of the movies that Andy and I have talked about on this show. If you swipe over in your show notes and you tap the word flickchart, just give it a little tap. It should take you right to this movie where you can add it to your catalog and see how it stands up against ours.
First up, we have Connery versus Connery, Robin and Marian, or Murder on the Orient Express.
I'm going to go Murder on the Orient Express, please.
Hey, there's Albert Finney and Sean Connery.
There you go.
Together on screen. I'll take Murder as well. Robin and Marian, or the silent Douglas Fairbanks as Robin Hood.
Oh, silent Douglas Fairbanks as Robin
I will take Robin and Marian.
Really?
All
right.
Yes, I will. I'm surprised you're taking Robin Hood.
Yeah,
but there we are. There we are.
That's where we are. All right. One, two, three.
Scissors.
Paper. Oh, curse you.
There we go. Robin and Marian, or Russian Dolls?
Russian Dolls.
I'm going to take Robin and Marian.
Really? Again?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Here we go again.
All right. One, two, three. Scissors.
Rock. Crush you. I crush
me.
Crush you.
Robin and Marian, or Lupin III, The Castle of Cagliostro?
Hands down, I'm going with Lupin III.
I will take Lupin as well.
Yes, you will.
Robin and Marian, or Compulsion?
Compulsion.
Definitely Compulsion.
Yeah. Easy.
Robin and Marian, or The Book of Eli?
Book of Eli.
Yeah, I'll take Book of Eli. Robin and Marian, or Atlantic City? Another aged man in love.
Yeah, that was weird with the lemon juice. Never quite figured that one out. I still think I'd probably go with Atlantic City.
I will too.
You will too? Okay. All right.
I will too.
Then
Yeah. Robin and Marian, or La Femme Nikita?
La Femme Nikita.
Yeah, I will take Nikita as well. Robin and Marian, or Robin and the Seven Hoods?
I'm thinking Robin and Marian.
I'm on Robin and Marian as well.
Okay. All right, let's go with it.
All right. Robin and Marian landed at 310 out of 414 on our chart. That puts Robin and Marian, Robin and the Seven Hoods, and the 1922 Robin Hood all in a row. Right next to each other. 310, 311, 312. How funny is that?
They're not doing great, these Robin Hood movies in general.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. This one, it's very frustrating for me. This is one of those 70s films that is compelling and needs to be retold, because I think there is a really amazing story here that's just not completely told the way that it needed to be. For me, this landed 2321 out of 4192 on my Letterboxd, which is about a 45%.
This one hit 822 out of 1100 on my flick chart, and that is 25%. If I were to go by the algorithm to take us over to Letterboxd, that would be 1.5 stars. I think it's hovering right in that area. I was leaning at 2 stars as we started this, and I'm not sure if it's gotten better or worse. Where are you?
I'm at 3 stars and a like.
All right. I will inflate to 2.5 stars. I'm not going to give it a like. It's a middling film for me, and we'll see if on further viewing it improves.
Interestingly, that is basically the same ratings we gave the last Robin Hood film, except reversed. I gave it a 2.5 and you gave it a 3.
That's funny.
Although we both gave it a heart on that one.
So you're saying I should give it a heart? Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't think you
Well,
need
maybe
to.
now I'm rethinking this,
I'm
because
just
if
finding the point.
I have already said that I
interesting.
am willing to watch this movie again. Maybe that's enough. Maybe I should give it a heart.
It's interesting that you will watch it again, yes.
All right. I'm going to let that hang.
Well, next up, everybody, we are going to be looking at, this is, I think, the big one that we all know and love, I think, because it was kind of like came out at that perfect point in our lives to really kind of connect with a Robin Hood film. It is the 1991 Kevin Costner vehicle, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, directed by his then buddy, Kevin Reynolds.
Everything I do, Andy.
Ooh, say it.
I do it for you.
There it is. So good. It should be a fun one to look at again. I haven't seen it in ages, and I will be watching the extended cut.
That's what I was going to ask you. Extended cut or theatrical cut? I don't know what I should do.
Well, my library only have the extended cut, so
do you?
I guess I'm watching that one.
What's the difference in runtime? Do you know off the top of your head?
I looked it up. Let me tell you. Hold, please. The extended cut
it's just one more Bryan Adams song.
One more, right. Everything I do it for you and you.
I do it for all of you.
Looks like the extended cut is 155 minutes. So that's 120, 130, 2 hours, 35 minutes.
All right.
According to IMDb, the film was released at 2 hours and 23 minutes. So it's about 12 minutes longer.
All right. I can deal with that.
Yeah.
I'm excited about this one, even though, I'm not a big fan of the 2x4, but I have some very strong emotional connections to this movie.
Yes, indeed. And this one will be interesting to look for, I think, Prince John.
Yep.
And the Sheriff of Nottingham.
Marian Fitzwalter.
Marian Fitzwalter. Will, I think, will have a little more prominence in this one. It's going to be interesting. And also, this is the one where, at least in our series, we actually start getting characters coming back from the Middle East with Robin when he returns from the Crusades. Because we will have Morgan Freeman joining him as Azim.
Outstanding. I'm very excited about it. We've got some other things coming up. Make sure if you haven't, the guys have gotten together and they have come back and given us a recent film board if you haven't checked that one out. And they also, the Trailer Rewind guys did Destroyer, which is a great film to check out. If you'd like to hear them talk about it, make sure you skip back in your feed and check that one out. It's a real hoot. Unless
we forget that we are releasing hiatus episodes for the Marvel Movie Minute. We are looking at the Hulk. That's our next film. And so we thought it'd be fun to look at all the TV movies and all the other iterations of Hulk. So we're looking at the 5 TV movies along with Ang Lee's film as our hiatus episodes. So by the time this comes out, I think we will have, 2 of our episodes available, or is it still just 1 by the time this comes out? I think we'll have 2 available by then. I don't know which 2. The first one, definitely the Incredible Hulk and the Return of the Incredible Hulk. Return of the Incredible. That's what it is. It's going to be fun. So far, it's been great. Surprisingly great. Y'all, seriously, not what you think you remember. It's better than that. Lots of fun. That's right. When the movie ends, our conversation begins. Amazon giveth, Andrew. As Amazon always doeth. I went high this week since I wasn't as enthusiastic about the movie, and I think I found one that is as much a review as it is a poem. I don't know how to interpret it correctly. Just I need you to know, as I'm reading it, every paragraph starts with an ampersand. Ew, okay. Are you going to say "and" each time? I will be saying "and." I don't believe they were supposed to be interpreted as bullets, but I shall begin. Okay. 2011 5-star review. Best ever. Bar none.
And there are more than a few outstanding actors who have been Robin Hood on the screen. Russell Crowe, Errol Flynn, Jason Connery on the little screen. And Sean Connery and Audrey Hepburn gave the Robin Hood story its heroism. Most of them do, its depth and its humanity. This is not a cardboard cutout love story. It's a love story for romantics who have grown older and wiser and who are still in love. Robert Shaw plays a conflicted sheriff of Nottingham, a soldier faced with fighting an opponent he knows is better man than he is because the king says he must. And Nicole Williamson as Little John is both Robin's friend and a realist who worries that his old friend's insistence that he is the Robin Hood of the ballads is bound to end in disaster. Little John knows that Robin has grown old and that his muscles ache in the cold and the wet, but he follows him to Sherwood nonetheless. And Richard Harris is a splendid mad megalomaniac, King Richard Lionheart, who dies in a French field fighting for nothing more than a piece of carved stone. Bar none, Robin and Marian is the best Robin Hood ever. And scene.
Wow.
There's a lot of ampersands in there. I don't know if you could tell. I tried to lean in on them a little bit. They were everywhere.
They usually fit. It wasn't just like randomly thrown between words that shouldn't have an and between them, though. Yeah,
well, I mean, in terms of, if you're going to pick it apart.
That's what poetry's for, Pete.
What's yours?
Well, speaking of poetry, weirdly, I have one that kind of looks like it. There's no real poetry, but it looks like they were writing it as such. So It's a 1-star who written by NR, and this is what NR has to say. You'll probably agree completely. An absolutely horrible ending, totally out of thin air. Ruined the movie. Makes you angry that you trusted them, made you demand your wasted time back. The movie should have been good, though it was self-confused. Sometimes it was a spoof, which might have been filmed with Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Sometimes it was a serious, realistic reconsideration of the ancient and powerful Robin Hood legends. All well produced, but then the ending. Marian murders Robin and kills herself, and as they die, Robin tells Marian he loves her. The whole movie has encouraged you to reimagine the heroic, legendary, almost superhuman figures as heroic in their own real, non-superhuman way. Then suddenly, both Marian and Robin are nothing but murderous psychopaths. This is true spoiler of an ending, so if you read this, you have now been saved from a spoiler. This person doesn't understand how to do spoiler alerts. A horrible, senseless ending ruins the whole movie.
Wow.
And scene.
And the same could be said of that review. Thanks, Amazon. It's hard to believe we have been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
Oh, you're telling me. Producing this show week after week is so much fun, but it does require a ton of work behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchases made through our links give us a small commission at no extra cost to you and allow us to keep having these great discussions.
We are highlighting adaptations from Season 9 over at our originals page, thenextreel.com/originals. That's the site where listeners can purchase the source material for all of our adapted film discussions.
We had a big Robin Hood series this season, looking at 9 different versions on screen. Many were likely adapted from Howard Pyle's The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, including Douglas Fairbanks in Robin Hood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, Disney's Robin Hood Prince of Thieves, and the 1991 Robin Hood, and Ridley Scott's Robin Hood.
Robin and Marian was specifically based on the ballad, The Jest of Robin Hood.
And we really don't have too much to say about Robin and the Seven Hoods.
We talked Dead Ringers for our David Cronenberg series adapted from Barry Wood and Jack Geesland's novel Twins.
Have you checked out that show?
I haven't, but I've heard great things.
2 comedies from our Steve Martin series were adaptations, Pennies from Heaven from the BBC series, and The Lonely Guy from the book by Bruce J. Friedman.
The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas was part of our Colin Higgins series, adapted from the Broadway musical.
Spike Lee brought us Black Klansman from Ron Stallworth's memoir.
And we looked at a trio of John le Carre adaptations, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, The Little Drummer Girl, and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Plus, all 3 movies in our Agnieszka Holland series were based on books, Europa, In Darkness, and Spore.
La Cage aux Folles and its remake The Birdcage both came from Jean Poiret's original play.
We also talked about Arsenic and Old Lace and Charade in our Cary Grant series.
All of these were based on other material, and it is all available on our originals page, thenextreel.com/originals. Every book purchased supports the podcast.
Get the full list of adaptations we've covered and start your next read today at thenextreel.com/originals.